Have you ever felt like you hit rock bottom, as if every step forward only led to more challenges? Joe Henderson knows exactly how that feels. A seasoned truck driver, he dedicated his life to the road but always dreamed of something bigger, changing his life, taking care of his family, and maybe even opening a barbecue restaurant. Yet his dreams seemed as distant as the destinations he traveled. Until one day, on a lonely stretch of road, his truck broke down, and that moment marked the beginning of a transformation he could never have imagined. What seemed like just another blow from life turned into a pivotal turning point. It's curious, isn't it? How the worst situations can hide unexpected opportunities. But Joe's story isn't just about luck. It's about hard work, resilience, and the people who cross our paths when we least expect it. He discovered that sometimes, an unexpected encounter can be exactly what we need to turn dreams into reality. If you're sitting there thinking that changing your life is impossible, that the obstacles are too great, this story will prove you wrong. It's about believing even when everything seems lost. And, of course, how a simple act of resilience can spark something extraordinary. Ready to find out how everything changed for Joe and, perhaps, learn something that could change your life too? Joe Henderson was the kind of man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, both literally and figuratively. A truck driver since his 20s, he had traversed the roads of the United States like few others. Every curve, every stop at a roadside barbecue joint, and every night sleeping in his truck was part of his routine. But deep down, the dream of changing his life was always with him. He wanted more. It wasn't just about money, it was about taking care of his family and giving them a better future. Have you ever felt that? That burning desire to rewrite your story? Money was always tight, and challenges appeared like potholes on poorly maintained roads. Joe knew that being a truck driver meant more than just driving. It was about resilience. He endured long journeys, extreme fatigue, and the pain of spending so much time away from home. It was this distance that fueled his dream of opening his own barbecue restaurant. He had the talent, he knew how to make great barbecue, and he even had a name in mind, the Trucker's Barbecue. The problem? He had no idea where to start, and like many, he thought a dream like that was too big for a simple man like him. Even so, Joe refused to give up. He nurtured his dream during the long hours on the road, imagining the details, the menu, the warm customer service, the welcoming environment that would draw in not just truckers but entire families. With every million miles he drove, he thought about how good it would be to escape his exhausting routine. After all, who doesn't want to change their life? But something always held him back. The lack of opportunity, that one chance that could turn everything upside down, or perhaps set everything right. Things were far from simple, but Joe always believed that hard work could get him somewhere. He just needed the right direction. Every time he passed those bustling barbecue restaurants, he thought, asterisk, if they can do it, why can't I? Asterisk, the problem was, between wanting and doing, there was a road full of twists, potholes, and, more often than not, doubts. Joe needed a push, but life seemed unwilling to cooperate. On the other hand, there were moments of hope. He listened to stories on his truck's radio about people who started with nothing and achieved great things. And you know what motivated him the most? The thought of taking care of his family, giving his kids a better future, and maybe no longer spending so many lonely nights on the road. But could he do it? Could the dream of going from trucker to entrepreneur ever become a reality? Joe was always resilient. Between heavy loads and sleepless nights, he still found space to plan his future. He had a clear idea of what he wanted, but he lacked that little push that life, stubborn as ever, refused to give him. The world can be harsh to those without resources, but Joe believed that somehow his fate could change. And maybe it was this hope that kept him going day after day. And so, he carried on, his life divided between the roads and his dreams. Until one day, in the middle of yet another trip, something happened that would change everything. Sometimes, life surprises us when we least expect it, and that's exactly what happened to Joe. It was supposed to be just another long trip, the kind that begins before sunrise and ends with the moon high in the sky. Joe was on his way to Boston, leaving sunny Florida with his truck loaded with goods. The road seemed calm, but something inside him already told him this day would be different. It wasn't superstition, It was just the intuition of someone who knows the dangers of traveling alone. And of course, as with every long trip, he had planned to stop at a barbecue joint to recharge. But the road doesn't always forgive. In the middle of a deserted highway in North Carolina, Joe's truck started showing signs of trouble. First, there was a strange noise, then the smell of burning oil, and finally, the engine just stopped. "Oh no, not now," Joe muttered, pulling the vehicle over with difficulty to the shoulder. He stepped out to assess the problem but didn't understand much about mechanics. All he could see was smoke rising from the hood. There, on that isolated road, he felt the weight of what it meant to be truly alone in the middle of nowhere. With no cell signal and little hope that anyone would pass by, Joe began to imagine the worst. It was always like this in his life. Just when things seemed to be going well, something unexpected happened. He knew the repair would be expensive, likely more than he had in his pocket, which meant a delayed delivery and losing even more money. In moments like these, the mind becomes a storm of doubts, doesn't it? He thought about his family, the overdue rent, and the restaurant dream that seemed further away than ever. But Joe wasn't the type to give up easily. He knew he had to find a solution. Grabbing a water bottle from the truck, he sat down on the roadside, trying to think clearly. Maybe someone would show up, maybe not. All he could do in that moment was wait. And that's when life has a funny way of testing us. In the silence, surrounded only by the sound of crickets and the heat of the sun, Joe began to reflect on what truly mattered. He looked at the truck with a mix of frustration and gratitude. After all, it was that old machine that kept his family afloat. It was a love-hate relationship. But at that moment, it felt like the world was conspiring against him. Who hasn't felt like that, as if all the problems come at once? The difference is, in situations like this, some people give up, while others find a strength they didn't know they had. Meanwhile, time seemed to drag on. Joe thought about what he'd need to do once he got out of this mess. He had a mental list: find a mechanic, negotiate the repair, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to save for his restaurant dream. But all of that depended on one thing: getting out of there. Fate, however, had other plans for him. Suddenly, on the horizon, the sound of an engine approached. It was the kind of thing you almost don't believe when you're stranded. Joe stood up, hopeful, waving at the vehicle heading his way. And without knowing it, that moment was the beginning of something that would change his life forever. The vehicle that pulled up beside Joe's truck wasn't the kind you'd expect to see on a deserted road. A sleek, luxurious sedan, clean and gleaming, stood out against the dusty backdrop. When the window rolled down, it revealed a man dressed in casual yet elegant attire, looking completely out of place. He smiled at Joe and said, "Looks like you're in a bit of trouble, friend. Need some help?" It was Richard Carter, a millionaire known for lending a hand to strangers, though Joe had no idea who he was at the time. Joe, a bit wary, explained the situation. Richard listened carefully, asking a few questions here and there, always maintaining that calm tone of someone who seems to have all the answers. Without hesitation, he offered his assistance. "Let's call a mechanic. Don't worry about the costs. I'll cover everything. All I ask is that you share your story with me while we wait." Joe hesitated. After all, who stops to help a complete stranger like that? But with no other options, he agreed. While they waited for the mechanic, Joe began to share his life story. He spoke about the struggles of being a truck driver, the lonely nights away from his family, and his dream of opening a barbecue restaurant. He described his vision for the restaurant: a warm, welcoming place where truckers and families could gather around great barbecue. Richard listened intently, as if every word carried a unique weight. "You know, Joe," he said, "it's rare to meet someone with such clarity in their dreams. It sounds like you've already lived it 1,000 times in your mind." The conversation flowed naturally, as if they were old friends. Richard, accustomed to luxury and high-stakes opportunities, seemed genuinely captivated by the simplicity and earnestness of Joe's dreams. He saw beyond the weary truck driver and recognized a resilient man driven by an unwavering desire to change his life and support his family. It was the kind of determination Richard admired, making the decision to help Joe feel almost inevitable. When the mechanic arrived and began the repairs, Richard paid the full amount without hesitation, brushing off Joe's attempts to refuse. Think of it as a little nudge from fate, he said with a smile. But for Joe, it was more than just a favor. It was the first time in a long while that someone seemed to believe in his potential, even without knowing him well. And sometimes that's all we need. Someone who sees in us what we struggle to see in ourselves. As Joe climbed back into the driver's seat, ready to resume his journey, Richard bid him farewell with a firm handshake. "Take care of yourself, Joe. I have a feeling we'll cross paths again." Little did he know, that chance meeting on a dusty road was the start of a connection that would transform lives. And Joe's dreams were about to get a real shot. Days after that unexpected encounter, Joe couldn't stop thinking about Richard Carter. It wasn't just about the unexpected help, but the way that man, so wealthy and powerful, seemed genuinely interested in his story. It was hard to imagine a millionaire paying attention to the simple dreams of a truck driver, but that's exactly what had happened. Joe found himself reflecting on their conversation, almost as if it had reignited a flame that had been fading. Richard, on the other hand, couldn't get Joe out of his mind either. There was something about the truck driver that captivated him. Maybe it was the sparkle in Joe's eyes when he talked about the barbecue restaurant, or the passion that poured out despite all his struggles. Richard knew that the most resilient people often came from the toughest circumstances. That kind of determination was something he deeply admired. After all, he himself had started with nothing, though his challenges had been vastly different. One day, while reviewing his notes and commitments, Richard decided to act. He picked up the phone and called Joe. The conversation started casually, with a friendly tone, but it quickly grew deeper. Richard asked for more details about Joe's dream, how he envisioned the menu, the space, and even the kind of customers he wanted to welcome. "Joe, you talk about it with so much passion I can almost smell the barbecue from here," Richard joked, drawing a shy laugh from the truck driver. Joe found himself increasingly comfortable opening up. He shared the challenges of balancing his grueling road work with the time he longed to spend with his family. The restaurant wasn't just a dream, it was a chance to transform his life and be there for the people he loved. Joe didn't know what Richard planned to do with this information, but the mere fact that someone cared enough to listen was already motivating. Sometimes, all we need is someone to listen without judgment. For Richard, that conversation confirmed what he had already suspected: Joe was special. He wasn't just a truck driver with a dream, he was a man with a clear purpose and the kind of courage few possess. Richard realized he had an opportunity not only to help Joe but to be part of something greater. "Joe, have you ever thought that maybe what you're missing isn't luck, but just someone to give you the right opportunity at the right time?" The question lingered, leaving Joe with a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. After that call, both men felt that something was brewing. Joe didn't know exactly what, but he started paying closer attention to the possibilities around him. Meanwhile, Richard quietly began crafting a plan, something that could completely change the course of Joe's life. It was the kind of decision that would take time, but the thought of helping a man like Joe seemed like the logical next step. Then, on an ordinary day, when Joe least expected it, Richard reached out again. This time, it wasn't just a casual call. It was a proposal, a chance to rewrite the future that promised to be the turning point in both their stories. When the phone rang, Joe was parked at a gas station midway through his route. He answered with his usual exhaustion, but the voice on the other end was impossible to ignore. "Joe, it's Richard. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation, and I believe it's time to turn your dream into reality." For a moment, Joe was silent. He wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. Turn his dream into reality? It felt too surreal to believe. Richard, ever straightforward, explained his plan. He wanted to invest in Joe's long-desired barbecue restaurant. "Look, Joe, I see potential in you. It's not just about the restaurant, it's about what it represents. It's about taking care of your family and maybe inspiring others to chase their own dreams. I'll fund the startup and you'll pour your heart into it." Joe, incredulous, didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or simply express his gratitude. It was as if fate had finally handed him a chance. Richard's approach was both practical and inspiring. He would provide the initial funding and even offer mentorship. "I want the Trucker's Barbecue to be more than just a restaurant. "I want it to be a place where stories like yours find a home," Richard said, as if he already had a clear vision of the project in mind. Joe absorbed everything with a racing heart. He knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but he also felt the weight of responsibility. "Am I really capable of this?" he wondered. Sensing Joe's apprehension, Richard reassured him by laying out a detailed plan. He promised to help him find a prime location in Boston, craft an irresistible menu, and develop strategies to attract customers. "Joe, what you know about barbecue is already half the battle. Now, we'll combine that with some strategy and hard work. Believe me, success is within reach." This blend of confidence and practicality finally convinced Joe to say yes. The days that followed were an emotional roller coaster for Joe. He continued working as a truck driver, but his nights were now filled with meetings with Richard, discussing every detail of the restaurant. From the design of the space to the selection of meats for the barbecue, every aspect was meticulously planned. Joe could hardly believe that the dream that had once seemed so distant was finally taking shape. The most thrilling part, however, was realizing that this wasn't just about him. Joe began to see how the restaurant could impact his community, inspire other truckers, and, of course, give his family the life he had always wanted for them. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but with Richard's support, everything felt within reach. After all, it's not every day that someone crosses your path, willing to transform your life. And so, with the proposal accepted and the first steps taken, Joe was about to embark on an entirely new journey. He didn't know exactly where it would lead, but for the first time in years, he was certain that he was on the right track. The grand opening of the Truckers Barbecue was an event beyond anything Joe had ever imagined. Strategically located in Boston, the space combined simplicity and comfort. The decor paid homage to the roads Joe knew so well, with highway signs and miniature trucks adorning the walls. But what truly drew people in was the unmistakable aroma of barbecue, an irresistible invitation to anyone passing by. From the very first day, the restaurant gained popularity, not just for its food, but for the inspiring story behind it. Joe threw himself wholeheartedly into managing the restaurant. He was involved in every detail, from ensuring the meats were grilled to perfection to greeting customers with a warm smile. Guests couldn't stop raving about the unique flavors, and many returned just to hear the story of the owner who turned his life around. "If he could go from the road to building this, what more could we achieve?" was a sentiment often shared among the patrons. The restaurant wasn't just a business. It was a symbol of resilience and determination. With Richard's support, Joe quickly learned how to expand the business. He introduced special promotions for truckers, creating a welcoming space where they could rest and enjoy a hearty meal. Slowly, the restaurant became a gathering spot for people of all ages. The food, of course, was the highlight: smoked ribs, juicy picanha, and even kid-friendly menu options. Joe turned what was once a distant dream into a thriving establishment that brought joy to everyone who walked through its doors. What amazed Joe most was how the restaurant impacted his family's life. For the first time, he had the freedom to be present for important moments like birthdays and school events. His wife, who had always supported him, now worked alongside him at the restaurant, and his children proudly told everyone, "My dad owns the Truckers Barbecue." Being able to provide for his family without the financial worries of the past was, to Joe, the ultimate victory. As months passed, the restaurant continued to flourish. Word of mouth spread so quickly that even local newspapers started covering the story. Articles highlighted how a truck driver turned a simple dream into a booming enterprise. A place where the flavor of the food is only surpassed by the inspiration served with every dish, wrote a renowned food critic. Joe was deeply moved by these words but knew none of it would have been possible without Richard, and, of course, his own determination. With the restaurant stabilized, Joe began dreaming even bigger. He envisioned opening new locations in other cities while preserving the heart and soul of his original establishment, a welcoming spot for truckers and families alike. He also felt a growing desire to give back. Joe started brainstorming ways to support other truckers who, like him, had dreams but didn't know where to start. To him, success only had meaning if it could be shared. At the core of it all, what Joe cherished most was the friendship that had blossomed between him and Richard. They were not just business partners but friends united by a greater mission: to show the world that, with the right opportunities and unwavering determination, anyone could transform their life. And their story was far from over. Joe could hardly believe the transformation his life had undergone. From a struggling truck driver to the owner of a thriving restaurant, he now lived a reality that had seemed impossible just months before. More than achieving his dream of opening the Trucker's Barbecue, Joe felt he had discovered a purpose. He hadn't just changed his own life, he had inspired others to believe that it was possible to rise from difficult circumstances and build something extraordinary. The bond between Joe and Richard only grew stronger over time. What had begun as a chance meeting on a dusty road evolved into a deep and genuine friendship. Richard hadn't just helped Joe financially, he had become a mentor, sharing life lessons, business strategies, and most importantly, the encouragement to keep dreaming. Life doesn't stop when we reach our goals, Joe. That's when we start dreaming even bigger, Richard would say. And Joe took every word to heart, always looking for ways to improve and expand. With the restaurant running smoothly, Joe decided it was time to give back. He started hosting events at the restaurant for truck drivers, offering free meals and motivational talks. He wanted his story to serve as a living example that hardship could be turned into strength. No matter how heavy the load life puts on us, we can always find a way forward, he told attendees, his eyes shining with the same passion he'd had when he first shared his dream. The transformation in Joe's life wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. For the first time, he could be present for his family. His evenings were now filled with dinner table conversations, laughter with his children, and moments of gratitude with his wife. Every piece of this new life seemed worth the years of struggle on the road. For Joe, the greatest gift of all was being able to care for his family and build a future alongside them. That was what fueled him every single day. Richard, too, found himself profoundly affected by their friendship. He admitted that helping Joe had rekindled his sense of purpose. "You remind me of where I came from, Joe. And you remind me why we should never forget to help those walking the same road we've traveled." Despite coming from vastly different worlds, the two shared a vision. Life is most meaningful when we genuinely connect with others and lift them up. As time went on, Joe expanded his efforts to help others. He established a small fund to support truck drivers who wanted to pursue their own dreams, whether it was starting a business or returning to school. For Joe, this was the true definition of success, having the ability to change lives, just as Richard had changed his. He knew many still faced the challenges he once knew so well, and he wanted to be the bridge they needed to reach their goals. And so, Joe's journey continued, filled with new challenges and accomplishments. The Trucker's Barbecue was more than just a restaurant. It was a symbol of hope and resilience. And alongside Richard, Joe knew there was still much more to be done. After all, what is life if not a journey full of roads, encounters, and, of course, unexpected opportunities? Agora que você conhece incrível jornada do Joe, a pergunta que fica, o que você está fazendo hoje para mudar a sua vida? Às vezes, os maiores sonhos como em situações mais simples, ou mesmo em momentos mais difíceis. Joe poderia ter desistido quando o acidente grave, mas decidiu acreditar que algo melhor estava por vir. E você? Você está pronto para transformar seus próprios desafios em oportunidades? Lembre-se, todo mundo enfrenta obstáculos. O segredo é como você responde-los. Está na hora de você começar a acreditar no seu potencial e agir para fazer a diferença. Que passos você pode dar agora? Que sonhos você está esperando? Se Joe conseguiu mudar a sua realidade começando do zero, o que você impede de dar o primeiro passo? Deixe nos comentários qual é o seu maior sonho e como você pretende realizá-lo. Vamos conversar e nos ajudar a construir caminhos melhores. E, claro, se você gosta dessa história e quer continuar aprendendo lições que podem transformar a sua vida, inscreva-se no canal e ative as notificações. Aqui, sempre tem algo que pode te inspirar e dar aquele empurrãozinho para alcançar seus objetivos.